Hey everybody, this is RJ Carter for CriticalBlast.com. I've seen a lot of videos and articles lately about the state of the comic book industry and talking about numbers and talking about reasons for drops in numbers. And a lot of this is found in articles online. I wanted to draw some attention to an article that you won't find online, and in fact, probably few people have seen because it's only available in print. Now, the obscure publication that has printed this is something you might be familiar with. It's called the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, and it's been for 48 years now, according to this cover. Something that the industry has looked to for solid information regarding pricing of books, as well as market trends. And in here, on page 192, I would like to address an article written by Michael Tierney of Collector's Edition and the Comic Book Store. These are two stores that Michael owns in the Little Rock area, serving Central Arkansas. I just want to pull some things out of here and comment on them, so I'm going to read verbatim quite a bit here. And by the way, if you've seen this book, you can't really claim that the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide is biased one way or another to the politics in comic books these days, unless you want to say that this gorgeous Ethan Van Sciver cover of The Flash and Green Lantern skews it towards Comicsgate, which I don't think it does. And I hope Ethan got paid a pretty penny for this, because this is a beautiful piece of art. Anyhow, a coin dealer considering a change of hobbies recently lamented about how coins were the wrong hobby for investors, because so much of the values for numismatics are based on silver coins. His logic was that comics could never crash in value simply because the price of silver dropped. Unfortunately, the comic industry is indeed subject to crashes, especially with new comic sales. I've experienced the black and white boom and bust of the 80s, the speculation boom and bust of the 90s, and many other crashes that followed a boom. The crash of 2017, and right here you can already tell he's saying that there was a crash in 2017, came without a preceding boom. This year had dismal new comic sales as DC pushed firmly to the #1 spot atop the publisher sales chart, steadying their sales with bright spots like Batman's Marriage Proposal and subsequent engagement to Catwoman, plus a strong performance from the Batman spin-off event of Dark Knight's Metal. Meanwhile, Marvel Comics plummeted to a lower line average than I've ever seen. While Marvel is making far more titles per month than they did during my first business year in 1982, the overall average sold per Marvel title dropped so low that it's unprecedented in my experience. Some odd patterns have manifested across the decades, like The Punisher having averaged over 50 copies per store when it was an all-ages title, and now only selling a combined dozen copies between both stores as a mature reader's title, for the peak month of the year. In my particular market, younger and older readers alike seem to prefer their tough-as-nails heroes with an excess of guts and grit. Or without an excess of guts and grit, excuse me. But the movement of Marvel's entire line into an older teen rating was not the main factor as to why Marvel's superhero line has been following a spectacular crash dive on the sales charts. The bigger factor, cited by customers, was Marvel's Social Justice Warriors initiative, which replaced the heart of the most entrenched characters with new characters that combined different ethnicities, sex, and age. Sales dropped steadily throughout the duration of this initiative, and the reason was painfully obvious. 35 years of dealing with the public has taught me that you have to be very careful when dealing with the subjects of politics or religion, and no one ever wants to hear about someone else's sexual preferences. Marvel infused all three across their entire core. Now, this is a retailer talking, folks. This is a guy who actually makes his money from comics. This is not a fan who's sitting here whining about oh, they're not making comics for me anymore. This is a guy whose business is on the line. It's not that customers are against change. The latest incarnation of Ms. Marvel, as a Middle Eastern Muslim girl, performed well as a new character. Because the mantle of Marvel has changed not only publishers, but also feature characters multiple times in the Captain and Ms. titles, there is no longer a single accepted icon. When the mantle of the mighty Thor was taken over by a cancer-terminal Jane Foster, it benefited from great art and story, but also came with a temporary caveat in the question of her impending doom. Customers still wanted Odinson back as Thor, had asked constantly for updates about his return. I told them wait for the next Thor movie. Marvel always returns the characters back to normal by the time of a new movie's release. Then they didn't, which frustrated so many customers who felt that the Jane Foster storyline had already far exceeded the expiration of expectation, much in the same way that, by the time the Red Hulk's identity was finally revealed after 3 years, no one cared. New customers wanted to continue the adventures of the characters they'd discovered in the movies, but couldn't. Captain America was either the Falcon working a part-time job or an evil incarnation of Steve Rogers. Hawkeye is a woman. Wolverine was either a young girl or an old man. Iron Man had 2 titles, one with the infamous Iron Man role filled by the villain Dr. Doom, and the Invincible Iron Man title with a 15-year-old black girl, both of which combined to sell less than Tony Stark did alone. The combined sales of the She-Hulk, with the She dropped from her title, and the self-congratulatory Totally Awesome Hulk, featuring Amadeus Cho, were far, far less than Bruce Banner's Hulk. The reaction of the shoppers? You've got to be kidding. You're joking, right? These were oft-repeated quotes. With their all-new, all-different initiative, Marvel certainly tried to do many new and different new things, which never have a high rate of success. The problem was that they did it as a replacement for their entire core line. If they had introduced all these new characters in new titles, their success rate would not have been a bad ratio. But by abandoning the core of characters who made the movies so successful, Marvel ensured a downward spiral of falling and flailing sales. The same thing happened a few years back when DC gave readers the summer of filler with Flashpoint, and even worse was the sales disaster known as Convergence. Like DC once did, Marvel forgot the lesson of giving the customers what they want. And anyone wanting the Fantastic Four was just flat out of luck, as Marvel continued to allow the franchise to lie fallow. The Fantastic Four wasn't even getting cameo appearances in Marvel's crossover event, Secret Empire. Marvel did a good job by shipping this event book on schedule, which maintained sales levels throughout the run, but those levels were only a third of the previous year's Civil War II event. Secret Empire crossovers and spin-offs sold very, very little. Marvel did finally move away from the constant relaunches and returned to legacy numbering, but they killed the relaunch by making the variant lenticular covers available only to retailers who first ordered 2 to 3 times their average sales of the regular covers first. Retailers across America, myself included, ignored the incentives. Some called it a boycott, but I had turned in my orders before that. It made no sense to buy an abundance of stock that wouldn't sell, just to have an opportunity to buy even more excess product which might be allocated. My cheap bins have enough stock already, which includes the last set of lenticular Future's End covers from DC, despite having ordered low on them. With no one expressing any interest at all in this new Marvel set, it was an easy pass. The launch with the one-shot Marvel Legacy #1, which consisted of previews from the upcoming Legacy books, was best described by one customer who asked, "Didn't they used to give these away as free comic book day books?" I ordered really, really light and still have unsold copies. The disconnect between Marvel and retailers was illustrated in reports about how during the Marvel Breakfast for Retailers at New York Comic-Con, an unidentified retailer complained to the Marvel panel about the failure of the Legacy relaunch in his store, and at first received applause from some retailers. But then others booed. Given the spike in failed comic book stores in 2017, I had to wonder if the boos were a reaction similar to when battered wives defend their abusers. Battered retailer syndrome? Either that, or there is a distinct schism where their markets are completely different from mine and others. Marvel's reaction? Breakfast was over early. They then announced that the SJW initiative would continue unabated in 2018, with an emphasis on content for the LGBT community. Speaking strictly for my market, and remember, he's in Central Arkansas, demand continued to decline during and after the Legacy Sales Initiative in October. Not a single person inquired about the incentive lenticular covers. No one cared, and only a handful of the regular issues sold out. I dodged taking a bath in red ink, which was especially important after a September which dipped to a 17-year low for both locations. It would have been a lot worse, except for the bright spot of DC's Dark Knights, a Batman crossover event that started in September and completely dominated the month of October. What made the Dark Knights so much more effective than the previous Flashpoint or Convergence events is that DC did not stop their normal continuity and replace it with short-term events. Dark Knights ran concurrently with the established continuity, and the end result was that DC widened their sales lead over Marvel to double digits with a 15% margin. Still, October sales of new comics were my worst since 1990. That shocking statistic indicates how DC's sales bump was the tiniest of molehills when compared to top sellers of years past. The Death of Superman sold 2,000 copies of Superman number 75, and I'd worried that I might have lost my mind on that order. They all sold within 2 hours, except for one box that had to be recovered from the delivery driver's home. Many of those copies introduced new readers who still shop with me today. The fact that Marvel regularly solicits for 1 in 2,000 variants is an example of the schism between retailer demographics that I referenced earlier. Stores in larger metropolitan areas often have more people living in a 5-mile radius of their store than live in the whole of Arkansas. The metropolitan area of Memphis, Tennessee, has more people than the entire state of Arkansas. Plus, the only U.S. territory with lower earnings per capita is the territory of Puerto Rico. So trends that might be obscured in the crowds of bigger markets are immediately distinct in mine. Now, there's more to this article, and I will probably get to that in a second video just to finish it out. But this is in publication, the Overstreet Comic Price Guide, number 48. Again, this is not something you can find on Google. Again, this is not something from some biased blog that exists to give credence to one side of the argument or the other when it comes to political arguments within comic books, or Comicsgate as it has become to be known. This is just information from a retailer, someone in the trenches, and I figured I would put it out there for all of you to ingest and add to your own arguments for or against. For CriticalBlast.com, this is RJ Carter.